Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next in the series of our, what do you call these things, Chris? Vlogs, podcasts,
Podcast. It's
vodcasts. Let's call it a podcast anyway. I mean, look, let's get through the important bit out of the way first. What beer have you got today, Chris?
I went for a 4 Pure, so a local London brewery in the Bermondsey Beer Mile.
Local London brewery, supposed to be in Oxford. Anyway, I've gone more local than that. Here I've gone for Chiltern Brewery, Battle of Britain Old Ale. So we're in Brexit land now, aren't we? So it's all about being British and
I was going to say very patriotic.
Yeah. Anyway, let's whilst we pour our beers, what are we talking about? We're talking about ventures today, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to ask you some questions to start off with, and I'll just make sure you get your beer in your glass first. There we go. Oh, quite a dark one there. Look at that. Yeah, it's got good reviews. I've had the pale ales, and I thought, well, you know me, Chris. I'm not really into my pale ales anyway. I quite like them dark and rich. And they say that this is really good, so I'm looking forward to this one. Right then. So let's kick off with So we're talking about ventures and why we think they're a really good way of doing commercialization and impact from social sciences and humanities. I suppose, right, I'm going to ask you the question first. So why do universities do ventures in the first place?
I mean, that's a good question. You did actually touch on this a bit in our first episode, which is essentially, if you haven't got a company to license something to, then you basically have to create a venture yourself. But I think there's a kind of deeper point around this, which is why put all this support and infrastructure around creating ventures, why employ people like us. And I think the answer is that increasingly through the impact framework, there needs to be new ways to generate impact from research. And there are lots of different tools, but it is certainly true that ventures can be a powerful tool to do that. And I think one important reason is a lot of research that focuses very directly on impact, sort of in the applied space, it might fund a single project, but then that project might end when the research funding ends, and then it's gone, and all the amazing stuff that they did just disappears. If you can create a sustainable venture off the back of it, then you can have enduring impact above and beyond the research. And I think that is a very powerful and compelling tool for universities that think impact is their primary purpose of their research, which most do.
Yeah, and obviously there's a big rich history of this story in the sciences as well. And OUI was set up to do licensing in the first instance, just to sell intellectual property. And then it realized that it couldn't license some of its intellectual property. And it realized it needed to create a venture into which it could license its intellectual property. But a lot of the stuff, doesn't a lot of the stuff from social ventures, doesn't it? Social sciences, doesn't it suit like a charity? I mean, when you've got things like international development and interventions in sub-Saharan Africa and things like that, shouldn't we be setting charities up?
Well, certainly that is one option. On a technical point, most universities are basically charities legally, and as charities they're regulated, and if they spawn lots of charities, which they are part of, then that is basically something that they would also need to be regulated on. And were any of those charities to do anything that was not approved, then the university itself could risk its charitable status, which, as a particularly old institution, is a somewhat existential risk.
Yeah. They're not exactly easy things to set up either, though, as well. I mean, that's definitely worth saying. It's far easier setting up a venture than it is a charity.
I think so. I think you've got a couple of things there. Obviously, charities have some advantages, like they get tax breaks. But firstly, you have to be approved by the Charity Commission, which usually takes well over a year. You have a much higher level of compliance and regulation, which you have to do every year, quite rightly, but it's a lot of extra work. And it also restricts the kind of business that you can have. You can't just basically, generate new products and services to raise money. Charities are very restricted on how they take in money, all of which is entirely appropriate. So it is true that charity can eventually be the right option, but we definitely prefer social ventures as the best way to start, both because we can help support them and because they're light and flexible. And, some of them can become charities later.
Oh, of course, that. you can actually set up a social venture, and the social venture sets up a charity to raise money for itself. That's a little trick I've learned on the trade. But anyway, let's get back to the subject, because we're talking about social sciences today. So why do social sciences and humanities need ventures? I mean, what's good about why are they a good solution, particularly for social sciences and humanities?
Yeah, so I think they're obviously not the only solution, and I think it really depends. I think traditionally social science and humanities really had, I would say, kind of two instruments for impact. They had the very standard tool, which is, you produce your research and you communicate it in whatever form you can get it out there: books, articles, newspapers, whatever. Basically, supporting public awareness of your research, which is great. That's the communication arm. You also, particularly in the social sciences, had a lot of policy engagement. And that might be, being brought into a parliamentary group, working with the civil service on a particular policy piece. And that's obviously a very important and traditional mechanism where really academia can help form really good policy. But I think you basically need more tools. There's only so much space in the public. There's a lot of people competing for attention. Who knows? There's also cat videos. And we can all feed into the government, but we all know that the governments can change, their priorities can change. Boris Johnson's mind can change within the space of 10 seconds. So this is not necessarily a stable way to ensure your research gets impact in the world.
We're going down the politics route. We're sailing close to the wind here. No, that's it. That's great. Why not?
But what I would say is, creating a venture, like I said at the start, is a really good way to think about enduring beyond the research timelines, something that can sustain itself. But it's not just necessarily continuing the research. Once you create a venture, it will probably find new opportunities, and often it creates new research opportunities as well. You get new data, you get new problems. If you look at something like Sophia, which you set up, Mark, Sophia are now an enormous pipeline of data back to the Department of International Development at Oxford on all kinds of poverty data that can help researchers understand it in new ways. So it's not like it just goes out and disappears. It can actually be this really good dynamic. So I think there's a lot of benefits there.
But why a venture? Why not just license it?
Well, I think, one is it puts the researcher in some level of control if you have a venture, in a way that you don't always have with a license. But I also think licenses, ultimately a license, the organization that takes the license has the power and the direction of travel. And in your own venture, you get to decide that. So I think it's a more exciting option, not all of the time, but most of the time, to create a venture. It might also be some researchers want to try being an entrepreneur. They might have done their share of academia. They might want to try something new. And I think that gives them that option.
Yeah, the other thing is that you, in social sciences and humanities, what you often license is intellectual property, and that intellectual property can be not as hard as in a traditional STEM discipline. And so you have to be a bit creative if you are going to do a license. So I mean, you talked about why not do the project and just move on. You want to be make a sustained impact. But why is it a useful mechanism? Why is a venture a useful mechanism to make impact?
I think basically ventures can go much deeper than research projects. A research project's real goal is to understand something. And I think a venture's goal is to basically affect change in some way, in a sustainable way, hopefully. So they are doing two quite different things in a way. And I think basically ventures, both through their timeline, they can be enduring, but also in what they're trying to do, which is literally deliver that research, basically means that in terms of the impact and the scale, you can go much further than I think you ever could in a research project. Not always, but I think most of the time. It also is true that once you create a venture, you create other opportunities to grow. Ventures can take in their own sources of funding. They can collaborate with people. They're very dynamic entities. And universities are not that dynamic in this space because they're not meant to be. They're meant to help researchers do amazing research. But they correctly have lots of processes in place. They have overheads, they have regulations on procurement, and these can be very difficult for basically small ventures. So I think creating a venture basically gives you a lot more freedom to pursue the opportunities that you see.
It does. I mean, I suppose it enables the departments to stick to their core speciality, which is the doing the research, and they get to focus on that, and all their systems are focused to optimizing for that. I just want to go back on the policy angle as well. I mean, obviously, yes, governments can change and things like that, but in this country, you know, we get conservative governments with a small intermission of Labour governments every so often, and we've had that for the last century or so. So you do have a certain degree of continuity there. And we do get academics in social sciences in particular, but also in humanities, who will consult into governments, and they will consult and use that as a mechanism to affect policy change. Isn't that enough? I mean, and why in what circumstances do you think you would want a venture to complement sort of policy interventions?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's either or, and it is certainly true that just doing lots of external engagement to policy to business is probably going to increase the chance of a sort of spin out venture's success, because you're validating it essentially. I think a lot of the times though, government is a very slow moving beast, and particularly in the social sciences, we see lots of really brilliant interventions into different problems, be that with adopted children or types of poverty. You can lobby the government, but like we said, governments, there's a lot of political risk in what they do, and there's also limits to how they can move and how quickly they can move and where they can move. I think it's also hard for governments to start. Governments are usually better coming in a bit later when there's already evidence. So I actually think, even if your goal was to ultimately affect policy change, I actually think creating a successful social venture could actually be a better way of doing it in some circumstances. If you say, hey, government, I'd really like you to change this particular bit around social care. And the government might say, yeah, sure, we'll think about it. It will go in a green paper, like it will start percolating through the system. That's one thing. If you set up a social venture that delivers on that intervention and it runs for 5 years and starts creating scalable impact, it is much easier for government to laterally come in and support it or support its expansion. You've got the evidence base. You could probably show MPs what you're up to. And everyone knows that politicians like to stand on someone else's work and declare victory rather than take the risk of trying something themselves that might not work. So I actually think it can be an effective way to affect policy as well.
It's universal as well, because I went to the Skull World Forum a couple of years ago, and it was a session on how do you get governments interested, or wherever in the world they are, in a new intervention or a new way of doing things. And you say to them, right, we're going to show you, going to have a pilot, we're going to have a trial, and we're going to show you how it's going to work on a small scale. And we don't want any money from you. We just want you to watch, and you want to see how effective it is. And governments like that, you know, and civil servants and so on and so forth, wherever they are in the world, will happily do that for free. But then they'll be able to see, well, they'll have you can ask them, well, how do you want to measure your impact, or how do you want to measure the success of this? If you were measuring it, what do you do? Make sure that they are bought into the mechanism by which, so they can demonstrate to their superiors that this is an effective intervention. And then you've got the evidence and the people within government who can then take things forward and help you expand. And I have to say that that's advice I've been giving to lots of people. And I've seen it work now. It really does work. We've got a particular intervention in training for sort of skills training for people coming out of prison, or people who are in the Kickstart program, and having a methodology of properly targeting interventions, education interventions, into to make sure that they've got the right training to kick on and kickstart their career. So I tell you what, just changing the subject for a minute. This is excellent. This is a really, really nice beer. I'm really enjoying it.
I have to say I wouldn't. I'm very pleased with my choice. It's a nice summary choice. It's got the hipster kind of session IPA vibes I was going for. I'm going to turn the tables on you now, Mark, and okay. We're going to tap into your extensive knowledge and far-reaching vision. So yeah, start off with a quick one though. Isn't there a risk of universities moving beyond their core competency, i.e. research, by getting involved in spin-outs and licensing?
Oh,
Distracted academics, all this time spent being entrepreneurs. Isn't there a big risk there?
oh dear, oh dear. Now then. Now, so here's I think a successful university is one where everybody is trying to deliver the ultimate aims of the university. And if the university's aims is to do research and make a big difference to the world, then you should be putting in mechanisms which optimizes for that. And obviously, you want to be employing your academics for teaching and for doing research as well, if you're a research-based university as well. I think career development is a really big part of this. I think that in certain universities in the world, not all of them, and actually just a few elite ones, actually, you can buy yourself time out to do from your teaching responsibilities, for instance, to pursue an impact or commercialization opportunity. And it actually does two things. It enables the university to optimize its impact, and it also gives the next person in the pecking order the chance to actually show their competencies in teaching so that they can progress their own career. One of the big issues that a lot of academics have is academic progression. And actually, I do wonder if 20 years from now, academics leaving the university because they want to start or they want to focus on their company is actually a good thing. You often have academics who want to extend their tenure, want to work until they're 80 because they love their subject. Well, how about is an academic who then actually wants to cross the boundary and move into commercialization or social entrepreneurship or even set up a charity? Is that a bad thing? No, I think it's something that should be encouraged. I think that's what universities are about. They're about being a catalyst for change. But it means that you have to, and so actually, is it moving away from the competency for research? No, I think it enhances it, because I think by being more flexible, it enables the university to focus on what it's good at. It just needs to put the mechanisms in place to enable impact to happen properly. And occasionally in certain universities, there's academics are essentially chained to the desk or chained to the lecture theatre, where they've got to deliver a certain number of hours, they've got to deliver a certain number of, take on a certain number of PhD students.
Yeah.
And if those were made more, if you were able, don't forget, a junior lecturer is less expensive than a senior lecturer, so they'll leap at the opportunity of delivering a course in electromagnetism or social policy, whichever the discipline is, if they were given the opportunity to do so. And I think the numbers work out as well. It might be a bit of a pain for human resources and more contracts and bits of paper to be done, but I think there's an opportunity there.
I think there's also two other bits there. There's a lot of the early career researchers, academia is a bit of a pyramid, and there's not always an opportunity, and they might not want to carry on long term. They might have done the bit of research they really enjoy, and then they want to explore other opportunities. It is a fantastic opportunity if there is a venture that applies their research for them to jump into, because then that makes the use of all their amazing research expertise and gets to deliver on impact. That's sort of often a perfect fit. I also think the other bit is, to continue your point, some of the researchers go into entrepreneurship, might not work out, it might, but come back in afterwards. I think most of them would say that they are better researchers for it. because they then understand a whole different world and way of doing things. And if there's another possibility comes up that could be a venture, they are much better placed to do it. So I think exactly having that sort of Swiss Army knife of options is definitely a good thing for universities.
Absolutely right.
So my next question, though, is thinking of the bigger picture. We're doing this at Oxford. OUI has been around quite a long time, but what do you think the direction of travel is for UK higher education as a whole with regards to ventures?
I think that universities are going to increasingly be required to demonstrate the value of their research and the funding that they get from government. And I think that they need to be, the direction of travel is making more impact from their research. And so I think that eventually resources are going to be put towards enabling universities to better make an impact with the work that they do. I think there's going to be a diversity of I think what's going to happen is now, because things have been consolidated into UKRI, I think the movement is towards universities deciding for themselves how they are going to be spending the impact acceleration awards that they are given. So I think that everything is going to be, rather than having something for a particular research council, so for EPSRC, which is the physical one, and then you've got BBSRC, which is the life sciences one, MRC. That pot is going to be consolidated into one pot, which is going to be given to the university, and they say, well, you allocate that money for impact acceleration and do it according to what you've got in your institution, and choose how you want to distribute your resources, rather than it being done separately by different parts of the same organization. And that's going to have it could have lots of positive, and it could even be negative consequences for social sciences commercialization, because some universities might say, well, I don't know how to do it, so I'm going to put it all into STEM. But in terms of the money that's available for impact acceleration, from the ESRC, which is the Social Sciences Research Council, that has a very small amount of impact acceleration money as compared with the EPSRC, Engineering and Physics. And if the university feels that it can get more impact if it changes the balance ever so slightly towards social sciences, then that can only be a good thing. And I think that's the way it's going to go. And as a natural consequence of that is then you're going to be able to accelerate more of those social science interventions and humanities interventions as well. And thereby you're going to get more ventures as a consequence. It's just a natural consequence.
That's certainly what I hope for. So I'm going to finish. You have a magic wand and you can change one thing at the UK Research Council level to improve the state of venture creation at UK universities. What will you do?
What I would do is I would introduce a new metric, which, and I don't know exactly how it would work, but it would be something along the lines of the proportion of academic staff who are engaged in entrepreneurial activity, and use that as a mechanism for funding further research and impact acceleration awards. And I think that will solve an awful lot of problems in one go. I think it will solve how do you enable academics to free up their time so that they can actually make an impact from their research. And it will also encourage universities to put resources to being able to maximise the impact from their research. And I think an awful lot would follow. It would have a ripple effect, and it would change the dynamic within universities of encouraging this sort of activity to happen in the future and grow.
I love it. Okay, that's a wrap.
Fantastic.